Today, I want to deal with a very important topic, and that is compassion. And the problem that I see that is rampant really came home as a testimony of terrible teaching at the National Cathedral this last week. And you had a lady that stood up and started preaching on compassion, and she had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. And she's the bishop. And it saddened me to realize that this is the state of the world we live in when we have misguided compassion and terrible teaching in the churches around the country. And the terrible teaching leads to all sorts of issues within our own families and our cities and states. And it's a terrible thing. But I want to read to you some passages dealing with compassion, and then we're going to try to have an understanding of what is this? How do we have compassion that's properly guided? All right, let's turn to Matthew 9:36 first. And, we can start at 35. And it says, "And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd." Let's turn then to 18:33 there in Matthew, see what that says. Start in 32, says, "Then his Lord, after that he had called him, and said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave you of all that debt, because thou desired of me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee?" All right, well, let's now turn over to, how about Luke 10:33. This is a different one. This is a story of the Good Samaritan. And this certain man, it said, went down to Jerusalem, to Jericho, up in verse 30. And he fell among thieves, who had stripped him and left him half dead. Several people passed by him and didn't help him. But this Samaritan, says, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. He went up, bound his wounds, poured in oil and wine, set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And then down in verse 36, he said, "Which now of these three, thinkest thou, was a neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go, and thou do likewise." So we see a correlation between compassion and mercy. Then I want one other passage here, and this is in John 15:13. And you can start up in 12 if you want. It says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his beloved." Not just friends, but it says beloved. Now, what do all of these passages have to do with one another? It has to do with how we as believers interact with other people. Now, the story of the Good Samaritan, it doesn't say that this man who fell in trouble was a Jew, but he was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was living in a Jewish country, and 99.99% he was a Jew. If he was a Roman or a pagan, Jesus wouldn't have been talking about him, because he only talked about the Jews, the righteous Jews or the unrighteous Jews. So this Jewish man was going down, he fell among thieves, got robbed and beat up. And how do we treat our fellow man? And the Samaritans were kind of half-breed Jews, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees, Essenes, didn't really like them because they didn't follow the Jewish law as they did. They weren't totally pagan, but they weren't totally Jews either. They kind of were in this la-la land. But this man, he had compassion. What is this word compassion? And when you look at it in the biblical text, it comes from a Hebrew word, racham, kind of means, it's related to the word ham, means warm. It has to do with the feelings that are stirred with one another for your fellow man. We should have compassion on our fellow man, but what does this mean? Does it mean that our compassion for them should take precedence over compassion for our own families? One of the major passages that we have to look at in understanding this concept of compassion is John 15:13. Greater love hath no man than to lay down your life for his beloved. Why is this important? Because it tells us exactly what is the basis of our compassion. Greater love, greater compassion, greater grace. The word grace is chesed in it. It means this mercy, that we should be merciful. We should show kindness of some kind towards people. But what is the kindness that we have to show? When you translate this passage, greater love hath no man, what did Jesus do for mankind? We can't do one of the things that he did. We can't get up on a cross and die for all men. We can't do that because we're not Christ. But what did he do in his brief time as the leader of this movement, about 1.5 years that he lived? What did he do? What is he still doing for us that's showing us a greater love? He taught us, and he taught the disciples how to be righteous, what it means to be righteous. How do you interpret the stories in the text? How do you have a relationship with your God? And he did that effectively. He laid down his life. He gave his life from the time he was young until he studied all the way through his schooling, through the time he was with his disciples, till he died on the cross and resurrected. He gave his life on behalf of teaching his fellow Jews what it really meant to be righteous. What it meant to be righteous. When the people came to him and they were hungry, what did he do? he gave his brothers some food. When the Roman soldier who recognized the righteousness of this man came to him, what did he do? He healed his child. How do we respond to people who are in need? We first preach the gospel to them. Do you know Christ? That's greater love than anything. You know, one thing I'll say about the old Salvation Army, they'd take the downtrodden, the poor, the whatever, and they would talk about Jesus, because that's the only thing that's really going to change their lives. It's not a bottle of booze or a pack of cigarettes or, a syringe of drugs. None of that changes lives. That's how you have compassion on anybody. Now let me ask you a question. How is taking from your family and given to people who are breaking the law, how is that righteous behavior or compassionate behavior? How is it grace? Let me ask you a question. What happened to the very first law-breaking family in the Bible?
They were exiled from paradise.
Exactly. Okay? They had to suffer a consequence because they broke a law. There is a word in Hebrew that is key to understanding so many things that are going on in the New and Old Testament. And that word is mishpat. It's usually translated as judgment. Judgment isn't exactly right because we don't think in terms of Hebrew. Judgment in the mind of these people was half love and half judgment. The way you translate it is a righteous ruling in love. A righteous ruling in love. That's what mishpat is. And when God exacts judgment, He's rendering a righteous ruling in love. Why? Because a judgment always protects the one that's been taken advantage of. Let me ask you a question. When Jesus was on the cross, you had two other criminals who had received judgment there. One of them makes fun of Christ, and the other one does what? He repents. And what does Jesus do?
You will be in paradise.
Today you will be with me in paradise. He forgives that man, but the man still died. The man still received a righteous ruling in love. He still suffered punishment for his crime, but it was righteous, the ruling. Jesus didn't say, but hold on, I got to untie you over here, and take himself down and undo this man off the cross and send him on his way. And there's another beautiful example where a woman caught in the act of breaking the law is brought before Jesus in the temple. And her law breaking was being caught in the act of adultery, as it says, but she was suffering under the threat of being stoned. and killed for her law breaking. Now, it was kind of a setup, but what did Jesus say? What did he tell this woman who was breaking the law? Go and don't do it again. Stop breaking the law. Don't sin is the same thing as saying don't break the law. By giving people permission to break the law, we are doing what? We are promoting sin. We're promoting behavior that is anti-God, anti-Jesus, and anti-beloved friends. If we're Christians, we have to preach the gospel that says, stop sinning, stop breaking the law, because if you keep breaking the law, everybody's going to die. This is one of the things that got Jesus into trouble in the first century, because to the Jewish person, they knew that they were under an edict from Rome that Messianic people needed to be killed because they posed a threat to Rome. That's why you see the statement, it's better for one person to suffer than for the whole nation to be toted off into captivity. They didn't understand that concept, but there you have it. It's better that we as intelligent beings who are Christians tell people, stop sinning. Because if you promote sin, what's it going to do?
You get more sin.
It's going to get more sin, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to affect you, your wife, your children, your extended family, your community, your cities, your states, and your nations. And we see that going on. We see it with the rampant riots, allowing people to burn towns down, businesses down. This is not love. This is not having compassion on your fellow people who are coming into your country. It's not having compassion on anybody. It's allowing sin and crime to be promulgated throughout the world. We have to stand up to it. We who are one in Christ have to say, stop preaching trash. This is not biblical, and you're leading people into sin. Why do you think the churches, people are abandoning the churches? Because nobody's preaching the truth. All these people with the itching ears. Oh, can you scratch my ears? They're itching. Well, get the sin out of your ears. It's important that we preach the gospel. And what is the gospel? Christ has resurrected and allowed us to stop sinning and be forgiven of that sin. Should we sin that grace should abound? No. That's what this lady, Reverend Budde, is doing. She's allowing sin so that grace can abound. That's wrong. That's not the way it's done. She's taking advantage of people who are uneducated to preach a false gospel. Christ died so that you can stop sinning. He didn't die so you can sin more. That's stupid. He didn't die so you can go out and be an alcoholic, so that you can be a drug addict, so you can be a prostitute in Davos, whatever. No. He preached so that you can be righteous, so you can find forgiveness, so you can save your wife, your children, your families, your communities, your cities, your states, your nations. That's what he was filled with compassion. He saw needs in the people that followed him, and he wanted to save them. Now, should we be evil to these people who are coming here? No, we shouldn't go beat them. We shouldn't starve them. But if they come here, they're breaking a law. They're a lawbreaker by definition. There's no reason for the world to send us all of the criminals and us say, oh, it's okay, come on in. You're just a criminal because you're oppressed in your other country. No, you're a criminal. You could have been a good person over there. There's good people in all these countries. There are. But if you're going to come here, you're breaking the law. Sorry. We're not living in Rome of 2,000 years ago. You know, they said, oh, Jesus, he was an immigrant to Egypt. And no, it was all Rome. Egypt was under the control of Rome. Everywhere that these people went, it was Rome. Now, you had Jewish communities in Babylon, and you had Jewish communities all over the place. But they didn't have the same type of countries and borders. They had empires. And you were either in the empire of Rome or you were in the empire of, say, the Medo-Persians. That's why when all of these magi came to the Roman Empire and to the King Herod, he was scared. Because he knew that these people who came to visit could start off a regional war that could have been very bad. But they didn't allow criminals to just come in. If you were a criminal, what happened? If they had caught these people who attacked the Samaritans, you know what had happened to them? Rome would have strung them up by a short rope, and that had been the end of them. Criminals are criminals, and you don't allow lawbreakers to destroy your families, your communities, your nations. You don't do it unless you're really stupid or you hate Jesus. I don't believe a lot of misguided people hate Jesus. But I'm telling you, I have talked to so many people on these social media sites that they have been so deceived. They cannot see the truth. When you lay it out, you define the words, you define the terms, and they'll say, Jesus didn't agree with that because he wasn't a Jew. Well, it's pretty stunning that a person comes as a Jew, is circumcised in the Jewish nation, to a Jewish mother and father, preaches to a whole bunch of Jews, but he wasn't a Jew. Logic and rational thought has gone out the window, and it has been replaced with delusion and scales on the eyes of the believers, to the point that we have a whole church full of unbelievers that don't even believe in Jesus, don't believe he died for us. This is a massive problem. We don't need a false gospel being preached. And this false gospel of universal compassion and universal salvation is a lie from the pit of hell. We need Christ preaching the right gospel. Let's pray.